I'm black, you're white.
Now what? So what if I say the wrong thing?
You probably will. Who doesn't? But I'll do my best to listen.
Maybe if we're humble enough to listen to each other,
Maybe if we're brave enough to lean into those difficult conversations.
we might
We could
come up with some answers,
make some real progress
discover how much we have in common.
and appreciate our differences.
Now you're talking.
Good evening and welcome to another episode, another edition of I'm Black, You're White, Now What? I'm David Conley, Communications Consultant.
And I'm Chris Thurber, clinical psychologist, and we are thrilled to have John Daves with us. We'll introduce John, who's our guest today in just a moment. But to get back to our last episode for just a minute, David, any updates or thoughts on sort of this lost white girl or lost white woman or person syndrome? We talked a lot last episode about different treatment in the media of stories that will make headlines and the racial differences in that coverage. I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, well, I've been watching a little bit, and well, of course, if you've been following the story with a young lady, Petito, I'm sorry, I'm mispronouncing her name, but they ended up finding her fiance or boyfriend or what have you, finding his remains. And so that's, the update or whatever to that story. And of course, it got a lot of coverage because that's sensational. But one of the other things that has been happening has been sort of a slight uptick in the news regarding some women of color that have been that were missing during the same time. And so I've seen a few things about that, but it's, in my opinion, still not like an equal amount of coverage. It's still kind of like an, oh, by the way, sort of thing. But, I think we're going to go, we got a long way to go before folks sort of realize that everybody wants their daughter found, or whoever is missing, the wife, whatever. I think there's a long way to go before we realize that it's all newsworthy, and not just like we were talking about before. Maybe they consider this more newsworthy than that, or we'll get more eyes on the screen for advertisers or whatever. I think it'll be a little ways, sadly, to go before we start putting the actual human element above any of the rest of that. So
that's a good
that's
point.
my thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, I think for me too, our discussion really reminded me of how, as a consumer of different sorts of media, whether it's a magazine or a series on Netflix or, a app that features news, CNN, BBC, whatever it might be, in some ways I'm a drop in the bucket, but I'm also, as a consumer, contributing to those market statistics. What am I looking at? What do I register as my vote is important? And, and we should all do that. And we all have choices. So let me introduce our guest tonight. Such a pleasure to be sort of coming full circle. I met John Daves when he joined the English department at Phillips Exeter Academy, where I still work. And in contrast to my spinning my wheels and coasting in neutral, John has done amazing things since his 6 years in the English department at Exeter, and is now Director of Community and Equity Affairs and a member of the English department at St. Mark's School. So John, welcome. We're really happy to have you.
Welcome,
well,
John.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So, thank you. And one of the things that I think David and I have worked sometimes successfully, perhaps sometimes not, to do in this series, I'm Black, You're White, Now What, is, as the title suggests, just bringing people from different backgrounds, whether that's different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, ethnic, racial, uh, is, you know, there has to be some next step. It's not a question of just the optics, although that is an important factor, especially, you know, in all kinds of different settings and contexts. But the challenges that we face as a society, as a species, are not solved by checking boxes. And we are, David and I, trying to model some in-depth conversations, which is why we embrace this kind of long form podcast and not offer snippets and sound bites, but dive into some issues and get into, you know, the raggedy work of understanding each other better. I'm curious, in your role, and if I remember, this is not the first time that you've been in a position of leadership that who, you know, some of what your responsibilities include helping people to make progress in social ways. What are some standout moments for you in your career where you've seen, whether it's a Black person and a white person, or but people of two, you know, very different backgrounds, who could potentially clash? Any instances where you thought, oh, that's right there, that's what we'd love to see more of, that's a success story, that worked out well, these people did more than lip service to the phrase, you know, lean into the discomfort, or something? I am curious, in your work, what stands out for you?
You know, I think the classroom experiences that I've been had a pleasure of being a part of really do stand out for me. I think about my time around that Harkness table, where I listened, learned, and taught out of what I was hearing from my students. And one of the things that I saw in those moments, where there wasn't hand raising, there wasn't me kind of leading them through a lesson. It was learning about the content of our lives through literature, and the bridges that were emerging as they interrogated a text and put it in conversation with their understanding of themselves. And you saw a diversity of social identities and learners looking at themselves through a learning experience of what the sort of text invite you to think about and feel. I think about what my father would do with me, a man who grew up African American, but could pass for white, but didn't, because he saw himself as a man who was completely and utterly sort of proud of his race and the culture and the agility and self-awareness and all the skills that, and the Black excellence that came from growing up in Knoxville, Tennessee, and then going to a New England boarding school, Northfield Mount Hermon, in the 40s, and then teaching at Morehouse and Fisk, and getting two Ivy League degrees, and being one of the first Black administrators at Educational Testing Service. What I learned from his life is, it's not how loud you say something, but who you say it to, and how well you make other people that may or may not look like you feel heard and seen. And how within our society, the othering that happens to all of us in some form or fashion, often, whether it's you're white and you're coming from a working class background, or you're African American, and the institutional racism, as well as that's the durable piece, or the sort of just routine othering that is transient, that is just there in the moment, but is gone, meaning somebody following you at in a department store or something. It's that experience that robs you of your visibility and can render you invisible. And it's the bridging work we do to sort of see each other as human beings and learn how to do that. And then sort of trying to develop a vocabulary that our kids are born into around their identity. That I think is the biggest challenge when you run into an anxiety about critical race theory or 1619. It's really about not necessarily knowing a language and being able to situate yourself within that identity language, that history. That is the challenge, because our children can lean into that language because it's a reflection of who they are. But for a lot of adults, it's almost as if they're learning a second language, and they're caught between the native language that they grew up with this target language that seems foreign to their understanding of who they are and the history that seems to be behind it.
So you think that language is the language is indicative of like the feeling and the fear, or are you saying that just because they don't understand what's actually being said, by saying something like you brought up critical race theory, by saying, hey, we want to teach this, you're saying that maybe they don't understand that it's really about everybody trying to understand each other, as opposed to how they may be hearing it based on past language.
Correct.
To say that they're going to be excluded. Because what I hear a lot of times too with that, in sticking with that example, is that when you have critical race theory, you're going to somehow victimize the white students in the class. And so you're saying that's an old language that they're used to working under.
Yes, I think there's a anxiety or fear of looking at white racial identity and seeing it through the eyes of others. And what that is sort of lenses, mirrors, and kind of a second sight. The lens is, well, what lens are you seeing the world through? That could be geography, that could be your gender, that could be your racial identity, that could be the lens that you're bringing to a country, or the lens that you're raised within that country, right? So that can be an immigrant experience. And then can you hold a mirror up to that? And then can you see your social identity, your entry into this setting through somebody else's eyes and a different point of view? Well, if you have had transient or durable experiences of being othered or being labeled as not part of or not admitted and accepted within, you're comfortable having to see yourself through the eyes of others. You know Du Bois's definition of double consciousness, of having to do that. If you're white, I've always wondered, well, you've been at the center of an experience, and perhaps if you're white male and you're middle to upper middle class or coming from an elite background, what is that space where you've had to see yourself from a different point of view, where your sense of individuality is in question, meaning that if you're othered, you know that if you do something wrong, it's going to impact anybody else that looks like you. Especially if you're othered as a African-American, Asian, whatever the racial identity is, that can lead to that othering, that can lead to that transient or durable experience with discrimination. But if you're white, what are the instances where you might experience that othering, right? January 6th, maybe? Oh, wait, I didn't know that I was white. or I didn't understand that I have a racial identity, that I could be seen in a different way other than the ways in which I want to define myself. And there have only been certain sort of moments where that kind of othering, or that kind of, wow, I have to understand and look at myself from a perspective as a white person and what the implications of that might mean, or as a white male after Me Too, are there things I can say and can't say? I thought it was just a race thing where I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Now I have to think about this from a gender perspective. So you have these moments now where we have an opportunity to do some bridging based upon a vantage point of feeling othered in some form or fashion that has now impacted all of us in some form or fashion.
Do you think
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, just going to ask whether COVID helped or hurt that bridging effort.
If there was a silver lining, it was that it showed the interconnectedness of our humanity, that we were all and still are responsible for each other's fate, right? We were wearing, or need to wear, masks, not only for ourselves, but for your neighbor, for your family, for your community. We have to, when the vaccine came, we have to share it not only within our own nation, but globally, because, if there's a new variant of COVID in India, well, that'll eventually affect all of us. So there's a global, there's a local, there's an individual responsibility that we're still wrestling with. And the more of an elite or highly developed country, we're having to look at broadening our understanding of what it means to be part of an interdependent, interconnected world. So that's the silver lining. I think the challenge, of course, has always been, we've looked at education as access. And now we have to look at it as inclusive. And we have to think about what that really means to have an inclusive global understanding of how we're interconnected, and how we have to develop skills, vaccines, pills, masks, skills, tools to do bridge building, so that we have an understanding of our shared humanity, which then is connected with something like addressing social justice or social injustice, which is then connected with the environment. And these are vital aspects of whether or not we're going to do the bridge working, or we're going to unbridge because of our fear and anxiety about these challenges. And democracy and governments for and by the people, and that struggle is now more present, because the unbridging leads to authoritarianism and January 6th and other things that we as a I hope as a world is leaning more into bridging and global citizenship than alienation and authoritarianism as a response to these challenges that are impacting all of us.
I was going to ask you though, a two-part question, I guess. How, in your work and just in your observation, how difficult are you seeing that bridge building? How difficult are you seeing it being, especially with like a sort of movement to make sure it isn't, based probably on a lot of that fear and everything that we were talking about, when it comes to the language and the things that would surround something like critical race theory, but just understanding each other, period. There's a I don't know, like a strong sort of resistance to it also. So and I'm even with people who are trying to do diversity, equity, and inclusion work. There's a thing where there's a lot of box checking going on. So people will seem like they're doing it, but they're not really invested in it. Companies, schools, all of that. So with that type of thing going on with the direct movement against it, but also the indirect movement where it's like, yeah, of course we're about that. No, we're really not. You got a lot of people who are directors of diversity, equity, and inclusion at corporations, but they have no power to actually impact the company, that kind of thing. With that, how difficult is it going to be to build those bridges, and then recognizing that difficulty? What are some of the things that we can do to overcome that?
Yeah. So this goes back to that sort of white second sight challenge. So if your mind is culturally, and your habit of mind is, well, give me the training so I just don't say the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the unbridging, right? Because now you're not doing the individual work to develop self-awareness, and you're not taking responsibility of leaning in and doing your own personal journey to understand yourself from somebody else's point of view. When you take that out and you take it further and you live it out within an institution, you can expose your whole corporation or your school community to consultants and trainers and all of that. But if it's just exposure without engagement, then you're not developing the self-awareness skills. You're not understanding the needs of the time. And a director of DEI can only consult. They don't have a toolbox that says, I can hold you accountable for. Right? And even if it's a president, they can't hold you accountable for learning how to do the work of learning this language and applying it to your life. And if you think about masks that we wear, right, for our own survival before we got the vaccine, well, what were the masks we were wearing before we literally were wearing those masks, right? Well, we were socialized to think because we grew up at a certain address and because our skin was lighter than somebody else's, we were given a mask to think we were superior to somebody else, that we were entitled to certain experiences, comforts, and there's if that's one kind of socialization and masking, social justice and unmasking and thinking about yourself in relation to a community is a form of social justice. And looking at a history that says your sense of superiority or sense of self is on the backs of or on the product of this othering, this reducing, dehumanizing, well, that's hard to stomach. That's hard to look at yourself from that history and think, well, the positive is understanding yourself within this history and embracing learning about yourself within this history, rather than looking at it as a negative and just thinking about finding ways to rationalize status quo, or not looking at this other perspective and way in which somebody is situating you within this living history. So that's the challenge, because before it was, well, this might be the right thing to check the box on, but now you've got demographics that go along with change. So what do you do now? Do you learn how to see yourself and your social identities within the context of diversity so that you have an agile and self-aware understanding of yourself. You can communicate who you are, you can coordinate with diversity, you can be collaborative with people that look like you and don't look, and you can creatively reflect? Or do you turn inward and say, no, I want somebody else to protect all of what I think I already have, and I want it to be somebody authoritarian who takes the work that I should do as a person and as we should do as a people away, so I don't have to look at any of it. And I think we as a country, especially with regards to domestic terrorism, are really struggling with what direction we're going to go in. Because one party is saying democracy, another party is saying we will think for you, and we will protect this history that has nothing to do with an interconnected world, and a history that is complicated, and a history that we need to lean into to understand so that we're better for ourselves and for each other. There's a book by Jonathan Metzl, who's a doctor at the Vanderbilt University. He said, "The dying of whiteness." And if you get caught up in the sense of superiority, sense of privilege, it can become very isolating, and it can lead to all kinds of forms of threats to your health and wellness. And he said he's seeing that in terms of not only the mental threats, but also some of the biological threats, especially if you're not getting access to that social class mobility. What are the things that you might get involved in? Well, drugs, well, alcohol, well, guns. Where are the various places? Where are the places where you say, I don't trust science and I'm not going to wear a mask, or I'm not going to get vaccinated? Where are those places? Well, they're Midwest and the South. What does that then mean to your overall sense of self, health, wellness, and relation to the world, relation to people that look like you and other people that don't?
John, when you were at Phillips Exeter Academy, I think your second year, you won a teaching award and used that money to create the Exeter Diversity Institute. Can you talk a little bit about what it was that you created? Because I feel like it's prescient. That was what, 2003, 4?
Oh, when I created the Institute?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was 2013, and
Oh, it was, okay, a little bit later than I thought, but the point is,
yeah,
not last year. This way, you were not jumping on the bandwagon. You were creating the bandwagon that then other people jumped onto.
Right. So I was very moved by the idea of the kind of anti-lesson plan.
Okay.
That we were moving from no lesson plan to making meaning out of teaching through conversation and teaching each other through conversation, that everybody's a learner in the room. And that by sitting with the students instead of at the board telling them what to think, and then we're kind of regurgitating it back in some form, that they'd have to unpack, trust, respect their peers in the value of the learning experiences that would come from them. So I was like, imagine if we tried that with adults, where they learned about themselves through working like a jazz ensemble and stopping certain making of meaning experiences by looking at a text and thinking about what are the various ways in which we learn how to listen and learn how to learn from each other, and how that would enable us to look at the techniques and skills of having a dialogue, which is more about trying to understand each other than debate, and then arriving at certain decisions through discussion about why an argument or perspective is more compelling based upon evidence and points of view, and then arriving at a shared view or point of view on what were the major takeaways of a learning experience. Well, that also kind of seem to be the difference between how teaching a doctor to be a doctor, which is learned by doing, to now a doctor having to learn about the various perspectives of taking care of the health and wellness of the patient. And it's not just about getting a tumor out, it's about also the quality of life. So you're looking at a nutritionist, you're looking at you're looking at somebody's mental health based upon hearing that they're stage 4 pancreatic cancer. You're looking at a number of different points of view in the same way that those students were learning around the table. Well, what if we taught teachers that perspective and also taught them DEI, social identity literacy that included race, class, LGBTQ plus entry points into a country, into a global understanding of yourself, so that you can make meaning rather than just have students follow meaning.
How successful was that in your eyes, and how has that evolved? After the years that you led the Exeter Diversity Institute, you obviously did not stop doing that work and bringing teachers into settings, conversations where they could understand bridging, where they could better, perhaps than they did, understand an approach to educating people that was less about telling and more about discussing and perspective taking. I mean, there must have been many successes. There must have been some fails along the way. I'm so curious, especially, you were doing that, and as you said, 2013, pre George Floyd, pre Blackette, and it just fascinated to understand how it has changed, gotten easier, gotten harder, become more criticized because, oh, this is performative. And I mean, what I hear you saying, among other things, is it doesn't, of course, efforts to bridge fail when it is checking a box, when it is performative. And the way you describe the inception of the Exeter Diversity Institute, sort of the opposite of performative. You one shining example of getting people to be in conversation, acquire understanding and vocabulary that puts them in a better position to be better people, as well as better educators. But yeah, successes, stumbles, what's that been like?
Yeah, there definitely was some pushback when I introduced the idea, because you have to learn a new approach to what you've been doing. If you've been looking at literature from the arrangement of words and paragraphs and language and how it created images, to now looking at a literary agenda and what the author was inviting you to think about from a racial and a social class perspective, or a gender perspective, or an LGBTQ perspective. Well, now there are new lenses coming into the work that you're doing. So there was pushback from that perspective in 2013. I think today it's comparable, but now it's about who should have access to the conversation. So if you're white and privileged, there's an assumption that, well, you're white and privileged, what do you know about the struggle of Toni Morrison? Well, probably know a lot, because you're now looking at what whiteness is from a point of view of somebody who's lived with that experience. So you belong at the table. Well, what do you know about the founding fathers? And if you wear them in Halloween, you're racist. Well, no, because the founding fathers also came up with democracy that we love and aspire to realize, even though they were flawed human beings who owned slaves, which was the means of status during that time period. So when you're able to sort of look at history from multiple points of view, we all belong at the table. And then it's all about these sort of skills that we have to then use to develop habits of mind, to look at ourselves and our past in a new way. If we do that, we develop a shared humanity and we can model democracy. If we don't do that, we model authoritarianism, isolation, alienation, and power over compassion, empathy, and a recognition of our humanity. History has always been about this struggle. The question is, who do we want to be? And what do we want to learn from those moments where we look up and hold that mirror up and say, do we want to go back? Do we want to say that we as human beings can't learn and grow and evolve? Do we want to say that history might not be linear, but that we can't ever make progress? That we are all going to be kind of this cyclical, kind of like Yeats's poem, The Second Coming. The gyres of history just continually turn, and then we awaken a second coming that's half man and half beast, stumbling towards Bethlehem, waiting to be born. Is that the cycle we want for our lives? Or is there something that we can do to say, no, we as human beings can learn. We can learn through tragedy of something like a pandemic and see the value and lean into science, lean into education, lean into the better version of our souls and selves.
Let me ask this question, I guess, kind of from me I'd like to get both of your perspectives on it. Because a lot of times when just the notion of diversity, equity, and inclusion is put to an institution or a corporation or what have you, the anticipated pushback is from the white male establishment that they want it because they want to maintain the status quo, et cetera. But I'm submitting because I'm learning that there's also like a sort of genuine fear of being in that conversation, because it's so easy these days with everybody being sort of hypersensitive to say or do a thing that'll get you in some quicksand and you'll never be able to get out of that. And so then to me, that's sort of like the other side of breaking down those bridges. So I just kind of like, both of you ought to kind of speak on what you think about that. You, John, having, been working diligently to build these bridges, and Chris as well. But I imagine it's difficult and different for you, Chris, going into some of these situations, like, so maybe you can speak to kind of what that's like for you, or if any of those types of fears that people might have would have been even realized by you or thought about or whatever. Just, what do you guys think about that? Whoever can go first, doesn't it?
I mean, I think listening to John describe the importance of perspective taking, and if I'm using this phrase correctly, John, I think you called it the second lens, but seeing one's self through the lens of another person's experience, that takes time, that takes work, and it can be threatening. As you've described, the knee-jerk reaction to a lot of things that are proposed in order to prevent othering are misconstrued as like, well, if we include this person, just so you know, you're going to get less. Or if we include this person, just so you know, forget all the things you're used to. I feel very fortunate that in my life as a white male, my experience of including whoever or whatever, and by whatever I mean different experiences, whoever, people who are different from me, has been, things got much better for me. And so I um, I feel that that's a blessing. It also created, and David can attest to this, some naivete on my part, thinking that like, well, I therefore have been fully enlightened. And it,
Mhm.
you know, turns out I was an arrogant jackass for thinking that. Um, and none of us gets to the point where we say, okay, now I've learned it all, or now I've
Mhm.
understood it all. But um, I'm an impatient person by nature, so it was easy to tell myself, uh, you know, I got it. Especially as a clinician, where I'm doing a lot of listening every day and trying to be um, sensitive to different people's experiences and choose my words carefully. In my impatience to uh, participate in a lot of the, you know, different programs and initiatives at Exeter, some student led, some faculty and staff led, I've definitely made some significant missteps, and it's been painful. It's been also an important way for me to learn. And, you know, thank goodness I could talk to David about it, because I needed to talk to somebody who was not white and not part of Exeter and who knew me really well. And that's a short list in my life.
Mhm.
And someone who's going to not sugarcoat the reaction that they have when I tell them my, you know, woeful story of suffering. Um, and that's an even shorter list. So it, you know, uh, I guess in answer to your question, David, I think that um, my experience has been that whenever I've had the good fortune of participating in some of the conversations that John is talking about, some of the conversations that you and I have, David, tried to model, the result has always been personal enrichment. And I desperately want to, um, I want other people to have that experience, right? But I'll just end my comment with this anecdote. It's one thing to talk to, um, for example, you know, the two of you whose careers and professional training are, you know, are each of us different from one another. We share different things in common, things that are different, but we share a kind of commitment, and we also share an educational background that at least gives us some traction, and not guaranteed productivity talking to each other, but I certainly feel optimistic sitting down with the two of you, for example, to have a conversation about anything. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to be able to share. Then I have my neighbor, you know, a few doors down, who is 20 years older than I am, but also a white male, who knocks on my door, true story, 4 weeks ago, and wants me to sign a petition to have the town of Exeter town council — we don't have a mayor, so it's just, it is a, you know, town run by a committee — create a rule or ordinance or something that limits the decibel level of musical performances that occur in the Riverside uh, Parkway, Swayze Parkway, you probably remember.
Mhm.
And I said, I'll leave his name out, why would you want to, but tell me, motivation behind lowering the volume. For the 3 or 4 months of the summer, on Thursday nights, even being a quarter of a mile away from Swayze Parkway, like I can hear the music. It's really cool. It's like one of the things I associate with the summer, and some of it's music I know, some of it's music I don't know, but it's very celebratory and upbeat and whatever. And he said, well, when they had this Black Lives Matter thing at the beginning of the summer, my windows were rattling. He lives closer, and I thought to myself, I can respond in a lot of ways right now, but let me start with what he mentioned bothered him, which was that his windows were rattling. Okay. And like, he clearly wasn't at the concert, but maybe he's not at any of the concerts. So I said, that must have been, like, it must have really rattled your concentration, or I didn't use the word rattle. That was how he described the windows, but hard to concentrate, or if you wanted to take a nap, or, just, you didn't put the music on. And then he said again, well, it's all this Black Lives Matter stuff. So I said, to myself, I can't let this comment now be lofted out twice and not respond to that piece of it. I don't think this is a volume issue, but I said, what is it about Black Lives Matter that is bothersome or upsetting to you, separate from the volume of the music? And he just said, you going to sign the damn petition or not? And all right. And like, so I'm stuck right now. This is kind of where I am in my learning. Like, I'm great learning from and adding to conversations where I feel like there's some common ground. I don't know what to do with my 75-year-old racist neighbor. I don't know where the conversation starts. It must start somewhere, but if as another white person, I can't even in the most open-ended way have a talk about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I think there are a number of layers to what you just shared. One is self-awareness stamina. I remember my wife wanted me to go to a Prep for Prep event, which is alumni event. Prep for Prep are students that are selected from typically urban areas to be sort of learn the stamina to have to see themselves from a different point of view or different lens, and have academic talents, but they need to get the sort of social, emotional, psychological preparation to be able to handle the rigor of an Exeter, and to be vulnerable and to see vulnerability as a strength, and to build a kind of team of peers and adults to help themselves, to set them up for success. So, I'm going into the room and I'm excited to say, I taught at Exeter and I had remarkable Prep for Prep kids, and I'm so excited to share my story. And, my wife looks at me, who, grew up in rural North Carolina, but also knew the Prep for Prep kids from Chapel Hill in her time as a law student at Georgetown. And she's like, John, you sounded like a Black anthropologist, and you were sharing your story about your students as if you were sort of saying, hey, I know your experience and I want to hear your experience, and please share your experience because of what I know about the students. And don't you think that they know how good those students are, because they were once those students, and you're in a room of Black and brown folks that are successful and have used that opportunity to get to where they are. So, when you say that, are you telling them anything they don't already know? How about asking them what their experience was? And that was a hard moment, because I thought I was a self-aware guy, right? That was a hard mirror that she put up in front of me, and I had to look at myself from a different point of view. And I was like, oh, that hurt a little bit. So we all
And
have
that's
those
when you said
moments.
to her, "Are you going to sign the damn petition?"
That's right. I was like, there's these defensive, oh, you don't see me. What are you talking about? Are you calling me Carlton from the Fresh Prince? What are you trying to say? Right?
Exactly.
I'm Will Smith. I'm the smooth
Right.
What do you mean? You think I know the Carlton dance? I don't know the Carlton dance.
Right. Exactly.
You calling me bougie right now?
Right. Exactly.
So there's that piece of it, right? Which is when the intent doesn't match the impact.
Mm-hmm.
Then there is what Christopher Hayes wrote about in his book, Colony Within a Nation.
Oh, I haven't.
When you look at it and you say, so the way we arranged our neighborhoods, where there's a colony and a nation. The colony is where people of color have been relegated to live and have been othered. The nation is the pristine neighborhood where you shouldn't hear any noise. You definitely shouldn't hear any Black Lives noise.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So when that othering creates locales where some people are relegated and other people are able to live in the nation and dream and be innocent or unaware of that other history and that ongoing history of kind of structural racism and redlining and the like. Whoa. So now you're saying you need to develop self-awareness stamina. You need to get in shape. And for some folks, that's going to be really hard. And it will take the impact of a reckoning to impact their lives in some way, perhaps, for them to want to climb that self-awareness ladder. And some people might not ever climb that ladder. And then it's about what kind of coalition of people that is diverse, inclusive, wants to do the bridging, wants to develop this stamina, because one is the right thing to do, and two, it's the future. Well, that's the question. Will that happen? Because not everybody is going to buy in to those skills. Hasn't happened throughout history. But how many people will develop those skills so the habits of mind change? And that question about courage and stamina is still yet to be determined. And it will dictate to us whether or not we have more years of hope and movement towards a shared understanding, or more years of alienation, isolation, the unraveling of democracy, a lurch towards authoritarianism. Sign petitions as a way of blocking out the noise of the present and the future and its tie to the past.
Yeah.
In the schools, though, are you seeing more of the the positive or hopeful, or more of the doom and gloom side of that?
It really does depend. I know at a lot of schools, there's like a community within a community of students, and it's often through kind of affinity groups that know how to apply that language to their lives, communicate about it, be able to talk about who they are as learners through it, be able to coordinate with peers and be collaborative and coordinate information and reflect and become very sort of agile learners of the experience. Then you have another group of kind of privileged kids that are living in that realm of innocence and are awakened and shocked and rattled by that noise, but don't know necessarily how to communicate and articulate what they're seeing and hearing. And then there are adults that have been conditioned to think, well, I'm colorblind and I'm not supposed to see any of this because that's how I was raised. So you have all of that. And then you have ways of, the authoritarian party has ways of always stoking that fear without directly saying it, and then sometimes now loudly saying it, because that's the post-Trump sort of era, to push, ignore, deny the pressing need to do the bridging, to develop the stamina, to understand your identity in a new way, to develop the self-awareness skills that lead to habits of mind that will help us support one another and save us from ourselves. So again, it really does come down to which side of this is going to win. When I often look about it, I say, well, the marketing and the cultivating of fear and anxiety to win elections, to obtain and maintain power, versus not as savvy at doing that, maybe having a hard time standing by their principles of what they know that what's right. But at the end of the day, being messy problem solvers. So you're looking at two sides of what it means to govern and understand yourself. And it's also a reflection of what direction might we be heading and what will be the cost if we fall with the former rather than the latter.
Mm-hmm.
I know we're getting close to our time and I want to be respectful. I also would love, John, for you to give the audience and me some food for thought when, and I say me, not that I speak for all white people, except I do. I should just say it. I understand.
I was about to say,
I
from what I
understand all
read,
white
you have been
people's
elected.
perspectives.
Yeah,
I mean, can we just put it out on the table? It's the whole reason I do this
Right.
show. I mean,
Finally revealed here, folks.
What I'm talking about building stamina, and I told you how much it has, especially over the last couple of years, meant to me to have David as one of my closest friends and confidants. And not everyone has a heterogeneous group of friends. I think it's human nature. We tend to surround ourselves by similar, like-minded people. It's less threatening. It doesn't feel like we're going to lose anything. What is your advice? And it could be something to watch or read or just think about when, for a person who's not a member of a traditionally underrepresented minority, that is to say, they are part of whatever the majority culture is, what is a good thing to help them feel less threatened? What is a good thing to help them have more stamina? I mean, if I could wave a magic wand, I'd want everyone, as part of their high school education, to have a year in a radically different culture. And that's not going to solve the world's problems, but boy, it's going to get us a lot closer to understanding. I did a gap year in France. That's not a radically different culture. I was living with white families. I encountered a lot of anti-Semitism, so it wasn't without tension and growth and learning. But what are your ideas for how to build stamina if you are in the majority culture? Stamina for the bridging.
Yeah, I think it's a few things. that lead to that stamina. Watch CNN and MSNBC and Fox. Think about what you're hearing, how and why. Go to a predominantly Black, brown, Asian supermarket and sit in being the only. What are you thinking? What does that look like to you? How are people responding to you? I remember when I gave a talk at a school and a woman shared her experience, a white woman shared her experience of being a white graduate student at a historically Black college and university. And she said, I learned so much from being a minority. And then I learned even more about what it means to be white because I had the option of the ability to leave. Right? So if you put yourself in a position where you're learning about yourself through discomfort, that then leads to stamina, that then leads to the questions, that then leads to the skills, that leads to self-aware habits of mind. And then you start to ask yourself and other people questions. And then you can say, is what I hear, what I feel, what I see you saying is, or I'm understanding is, and then you're an active learner. And then maybe some of that fear and anxiety moves away because you might not have the answers, but you're starting to ask some of the right questions.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
I mean, you actually have to be like going to the gym to do that. I mean, when you think about it, I was just sitting here wondering, and I'm putting you on the spot, Chris, but I'm just curious, like, what's the last Black movie you went to the theater to see?
Black Panther. Is that what you mean? Like with
Okay.
predominantly Black actors?
With a predominantly Black actors. Okay.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm gonna take Black Panther off, which is one of my favorite movies for a number of reasons of what it did for me. I'm gonna just take that off the table in a way because it's Marvel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Marvel to me is like Vegas.
Right.
So it's like, go to the casino that's about Africa. You know what I mean? So, but what's the, you know what I mean? Other than say Black Panther, would there be another one?
Fences. I mean,
Okay.
which wasn't. I didn't see the play. I saw a film of the play.
Mhm.
And I.
But you saw the Denzel Viola one in the movie theater?
I saw it on TV. I mean,
Right. That's not what I'm asking you. I'm asking you, when was the last time you went to a movie theater and sat where the Black people were yelling at the screen, "Girl, run!" You know, that kind of, where you had the real experience. John, know what I'm talking about. You know, where you
I do.
I mean, never.
Yeah. And that's that only he's talking about too. Because what's interesting about that, it's a thing that, and I'm saying this because movies are sensitive to me, but it's a thing that we do all the time. I mean, we go to movies and when we're the only Black people in the theater watching a film, and the themes are supposed to be universal. But you have the same themes about family and all those kinds of things in Black movies. Movies will say, we're predominantly Black cast, Black movies. And what I would hear from white friends of mine about when I say, have you seen this movie or that? Their reason for not going is they didn't want to be the only grains of salt in the pepper shaker or something like that. There would be some statement that was made, and I'd say, well, that's interesting that, you were more likely to make that choice or to even get, you know what I mean? Like the expectation is not necessarily there for us to not, do it. So it's just interesting, but that would be one of those great
Yeah.
experiences
Yeah. Yeah.
that John is talking about, and what you could learn from that, because
Oh, for
I
sure.
submit that there would be things in those movies that would touch you like any other movie,
Yeah.
because that's what it is, the human experience, but it's told through a particular lens or
Yeah.
whatever. So
Yeah,
let me
the only
ask you,
thing that I
John.
would,
I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
oh,
go
you
ahead. I'm
first.
sorry. No, I
The
was
only
going
thing
to
that,
ask a question, but you stay on.
yeah, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I didn't want to ask it if you were going to say something that was about this, and then I'll ask my question after.
Okay. I was just thinking about the socialization process of constantly being the black, watching white films. Um, it took me a while to even become aware of some of the films that I grew up watching had no presence or no reflection of me in it. So, St. Elmo's Fire, 16 Candles, Weird Science. I mean, those were the movies that I saw, right?
Yeah.
Breakfast
Yeah.
Club. And I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Huh. It's almost as if I didn't exist. And then I watched Friends. I was like, oh, that's New York City? That's not the New York that I know. I mean, there, anywhere in New York, even Upper West Side, you're going to see some diversity. But it was like
Right.
all white, and then they've got the one black girlfriend. So it's fascinating once you start to think about that socialization process, that normalization process that you don't even question when you're not in the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what Chris said, which is really important, Black Panther and then Fences. Well, I'm not sure how many white people could even come up with two.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So, and how big of a deal it was that you had, an all black cast for a Marvel movie that was successful.
It was amazing.
So these are the things that again are about this sort of self-awareness stamina, because they're like, oh, wow, we can make a profit off of Black excellence. And it's not reducing Black people to dehumanizing stereotype threats. So, but the irony, of course, is when's Black Panther 2 happening?
Yeah.
Play the role.
Right? Yeah.
So that's this question of progress. And there was this other piece about, virtue performing in woke culture that came out of Chris's question. And it's that kind of cancel culture, not being able to look at a different point of view or perspective, is also part of the challenge, right? Because we have to be able to understand Fox and that point of view, as well as we understand the point of view of CNN and MSNBC, to be comfortable, because there are a lot of people that were only watching MSNBC and CNN that were shocked when Donald Trump won. Right? So that self-awareness skill and stamina goes both ways. And we need to be able to understand that, to know that what we're fighting against and why what we're fighting against is so effective. Because we are in a time where democracy is still in peril. We don't know whether this story is going to be authoritarian or democratic in our lifetime, right? So that is a question, because one party has decided on authoritarianism. So that is why these self-awareness skills, to the habits of mind, to understanding ourselves in relation to others, is just so important.
Right before we go, John, I want to go back right quick to something where we were kind of talking about the box checking of organizations and corporations. So if I am the newly appointed director of diversity and equity and inclusion for my organization or whatever, and then I realize that what they're doing is making sure that they can put the press release out that says Dave is now the new DEI, VP or whatever. But I don't feel like the company is like serious about the buy-in. I'm finding their buy-in to it to be more performative. What would you suggest as some of the things I can begin to do that would really be able to impact the organization like I obviously would want to do if I went after a position like that? Because in theory, I wouldn't be going to just sit in the office and collect a check,
Right. Everybody's talking about task force. We need a task force with this, we need a task force with that. I was asked at my current school to come up with a task force. So I said, okay, well, I need a task force that represents all of the aspects of a school community. So one is constituency engagement, which is admission advancement and communications. Another is student experience, everything outside the traditional classroom, including athletics. Another is teaching and learning, what and how we teach. And then that fourth quadrant is professional development for faculty, staff, and students. You need to look at all four of those areas and say, how are they doing? And what is the support? And whether or not people are just looking to you to figure out what all those various quadrants are going to do, or are people within all of those quadrants empowering themselves, and are people then leaning into what they've been exposed to, engage with, to determine whether or not the mission and vision of the task force represents the mission and vision of the institution, and we're evolving and we're moving forward, or is board, head, CFO, CEO now all of a sudden in a different place where they're not demonstrating the stamina. That's the gauge, right? Because you're the consultant. If you're the one who's doing all of that, then what happens if you leave?
Right.
What happens if you get fired? Right? There's only so much talking you could do and advising and coaching you could do. So if the people don't take up and empower themselves to do the work and start defining what the roles are within and in relation to those areas, whatever the institution is, then yeah, you're just going to be checking boxes.
Good.
I like, David, especially your question, the part of your question that was about feeling, okay, this isn't genuine in one of these quadrants or in, some other area, and recognizing, as John said, there's only so much talking that you can do. And I want people to be able to have, experiences. I was thrilled to read a letter, and John, you'll be excited to hear this too. The principal sent a letter to the Exeter community today saying, and I think it was also signed by the chair of the board of trustees, but henceforth, Phillips Exeter Academy will have need-blind admissions, which is phenomenal because it took a lot of fundraising to build the endowment to the point where really we could admit the students we want to admit. And access, of course, is one of the things we've been talking about this hour. And then work out, you know, the balance of what families can't pay rather than needing some portion of full pay students, which has always been the case up until now. So that's, I mean, that's fantastic. At least, you know, one more place in the world where those conversations, where conversations can happen in a intentionally constructed community that has, you know, representation from so many different perspectives. As you've been saying, John, LGBTQ plus, racial, ethnic, religious, geographic, learning style differences, right? One of your quadrants that you mentioned was teaching and learning. So that at least makes me feel optimistic. And I know we're time now. I'm so grateful for your time, John. Thank you so much for for joining us and sharing some wonderful ideas. And I hope that I get to see you in person soon. We're not too far from one another now that we can do some more travel. But I'll let David close it out and give John the final word here. But I just wanted to express my gratitude. I've learned a lot, as always.
Yeah, I took quite a few notes here, and so I will be going around trying to sound like I really know what I'm talking about. So if you hear something you said, just nod and say, "Yeah, that Dave is a smart guy." Yeah,
damn, that was a good tweet.
It's what it is.
Come up
Yeah.
Where does he come up with?
Man's amazing. You guys, here are the 4 areas. Listen, I thought about this. Came up with this all on my own. But no, I mean, I've really learned a lot, and it's great to be able to to talk to somebody who has the thoughts that you have, but the guts to then go and help other people to realize them. I'm really liking the thing about the stamina, and I think that goes both ways. That's for everybody to have, and so I'm going to be working on some of that with myself, because when you're saying that, I could identify some places where maybe I need to do a few little push-ups, in that area myself, or go running or something, so I'm going to work on that too. So I just, I'm saying all that to say thank you very much for, your insights and your thoughts, and for being a part of this conversation. I hope it inspires people to not just, check boxes in their lives. Like, I think we do that a lot too, where it's just kind of like, friend of another race, check. Friend in the LGBTQ plus community, check, or whatever, and not really engage with the intent to make compassionate human connection. And that's always my thing. Like, if we can start there, you'd be amazed at what we can get to and what we can accomplish, and how many feet on this bridge we can build. So thanks again, John, and I'll leave it to you for the final word.
I think at the end of the day, when I think about, I was adopted into a family of educators that dates back to before the Civil War. I was, I'm here on the shoulders of people that had far more greater challenges to building bridges and the experience of enduring transient and structural othering than I can imagine. But one of the things that I learned from them is you got to learn from mistakes. And at the end of the day, it's about how are you showing up to yourself and how are you showing up in other people's lives. And we need to really show up now, because not developing the self-awareness stamina and the leadership skills for ourselves, for people that we love, for the country and globally, means that we might not necessarily be able to say that we helped save each other from ourselves for the first time in our lifetimes, where that's a real question. Whether it's the environment, science or social justice, and just being able to show up in each other's lives as the human beings that we should be.
Thank you so much, John Days,
Fantastic.
Director of Community and Equity Affairs and member of the English department at St. Mark's School. So grateful for your wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.
All right.
Thank you for listening to I'm Black, You're White, Now What?
You can find more episodes on the podcast channel Teaching What It Takes, available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
To learn more about the work I do, visit www.preparingthepath.com.
And to learn more about the work I do, visit drchristhurber.com.